Mother of 6, Sierra Milton, awoke on the 5th of January 2022 to find that her eldest, Zion Foster, had not returned home the night before. Zion was a 12th grader at East Detroit High School. She had only just celebrated her 17th birthday in November. Like most teenagers, Zion had experienced a rebellious streak. She had threatened to run away from home and had even done so the year before, twice. 16 years old and frustrated with her mother's rules, she had run to her grandmother's house. Convinced to return home, she remained for only a few days before leaving again.
That's crazy,
that time
right?
causing enough concern for Sierra to call the police. But it was another false alarm. The teenager was struggling with her granny's recent cancer diagnosis, as well as her own desire for independence. That January morning was different. Zion had completed her serving shift at the Detroit Wing Company the night before. She had asked permission to leave the house after returning home from work.
Subscribe to this channel, subscribe.
Who she would be spending time with, her favorite cousin, Jalen. Under these conditions, Sierra agreed and watched Zion walk out the door. That was shortly before 11 p.m. The next day, the 17-year-old's boyfriend, fellow high schooler Vertez Gonzalez, messaged Sierra. Had she heard from Zion because he could no longer reach her? The last text message that he received was at 12:59 a.m. It read, OMW, meaning on my way. But Zion didn't make it home. Calls to her phone went straight to voicemail. Messages sent throughout the night were not being received. Finally, at 8:53 a.m., he wrote to her, "Are you alive?" Followed by, "This is the worst thing ever." Adding to the distress over Zion's absence was the response Sierra received from her cousin, Jalen Brazier. Despite what her daughter had told her, Jalen responded that he had not been with Zion the night before. He asked Sierra exactly how often had Zion claimed that she was spending time with him. Once or twice a month, she said. He messaged her back in frustration. Zion's lies about him were sneaky as hell and not safe, he said. But why lie about spending time at his house? He suggested that she was likely spending time with someone who lived near to him. Zion shared location tracking on her phone with boyfriend Vertez. This tracking had placed her just across the street from Jalen's home at 11:24 p.m. the night before. Vertez, admittedly a bit insecure in their relationship, had taken a screenshot of his girlfriend's location at exactly that time. Jalen suggested that perhaps Zion was using him as a cover story when she was in fact at a neighbor's house. She must know someone else on the street or nearby. Jalen helpfully suggested that Sierra go to the police, but he requested to be kept out of it. Vertez was not as easily persuaded. He inundated Jalen with messages. He confronted the 23-year-old with a screenshot from his phone. In response, Jalen sent back a video of his Ring camera system. There were no entries showing Zion at the house, he said. She was never there. East Point police were not inclined to take Sierra's missing persons report with any sense of urgency. Her daughter had a history of being a runaway. According to the distressed mother, officers at the station did not mince words.
The person that's over it now specifically said to us that, I'm going to be honest with you, we're taking this as she's running.
Receiving little support from law enforcement, she took matters into her own hands. With the assistance of family and friends, a search effort for Zion was launched in the following days. They posted flyers, held rallies, and spoke to the media.
Your eyes! The police need your help!
That's right.
We need your help!
In the meantime, officers were eventually sent out to speak with Jalen Brazier. Jalen, Zion's self-professed favorite cousin, was in fact first cousins with her former stepfather. That is, he was cousins with Sierra's ex-husband. At 23, he was a father to 2 young children. and he had a long-term partner, Katrina. Sierra believed that her daughter and Jalen had always been and remained close. According to Jalen, they hadn't spoken in years. They found him at home with girlfriend Katrina Smith.
Mr. Brazier? What's your name, man? Okay. You guys know Zion? So, they were saying...
Jalen invited the officers in to look around the house. He told them that he had last seen his cousin nearly a year before, in May 2021. Jalen continued to explain that it was Zion's mother and her boyfriend that seemed fixated on the idea that she had been with him that night. He had offered to show his ring camera footage to Sierra as well. When she took a look at it, the mother thought that there were gaps in entries for footage for the night of January 4th, which had obviously been deleted. East Point police found nothing suspicious in the search of the house. There were no indications that Zion had been there. They listened while Jalen explained his frustrations over being pulled into the drama caused by his 17-year-old cousin, with whom he rarely spends any time.
Came back and we got just basically showing this girl was never in my house. So usually, we and you know we get runaway, but she's like 4 times, and every time she got some dude's house. For our emotions, her house just playing a certain way and it's making me so fucking uncomfortable. She's the only one? Yes, I would assume you guys would know that. Not saying like her job, just assume she would tell you the damn information. No, I know. Appreciate it. Alright guys, enjoy the rest of your night.
Jalen may have been fooling the East Point police at this stage, but not Sierra Milton. She did indeed watch to see who her daughter left with from the house, and she often greeted Jalen herself in the drive when he came by to collect her. She knew he was lying.
He told me he hadn't seen or been in contact with him for 3 years. Which is impossible when you were in my driveway and gave me a hug.
Perhaps the easiest way to verify if Zion had been across the street from her cousin's house, as her location data suggested, was to check the neighbor's doorbell cameras. At about 11:15 p.m. on January 4th, a white sedan, the car known to be driven by Jalen Brazier, was captured pulling into his drive. Emerging from the vehicle were 2 individuals, clearly seen walking into the house, 1 male and 1 female. Jalen had driven Katrina to work at just before 11 p.m. that night. She was on the midnight shift at a manufacturing job. The shift spanned from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. The second individual who entered the house at 11:15 could not have been Katrina. Phone location data would later confirm the 2 individuals captured entering the home, Jalen Brazier and Zion Foster. The camera did not show Zion leaving. At 1:41 a.m., the same camera from across the street captured Jalen pulling his car out of the drive and then backing it in. The trunk then faced the backyard. After a few minutes, the car drove off. It returned to the house less than 10 minutes later. Search warrants were obtained for the house and the car. Inside the house, the search was fruitless. The contents of the car were carefully itemized and examined, but there was no clear evidence indicating what had happened to Zion. That is, until law enforcement brought in the cadaver dogs. The dogs clearly indicated at the trunk of Jalen's car. On January 19th, the 23-year-old, accompanied by a friend who was a lawyer, voluntarily sat down with detectives. It was clear that he had lied about being with Zion on the night that she disappeared. Jalen came forward to offer what he claimed was a truthful version of events from that night. He had picked up Zion from her home and brought her back to his place. He put his 2 children, boys aged 1 and 2 years old, to bed, then joined Zion downstairs in the living room.
You guys recently leave from the room. You guys started smoking. You're just walking through his children. Yeah, she's telling me about their relationship's a lot better than was the last time we talked to us. And my boyfriend, the job and everything, and how she worked on getting us out there.
Jalen said they smoked some marijuana, which appeared to make Zion very sleepy. He saw her head tilt back, as though she intended to take a nap while sitting upright on the couch. At that point, he went into the other room to pour himself a drink.
You guys are just chilling, and that's all of a sudden she just blanks out right there. I got up to go get me something to drink. Yeah. I came back, and she was saying she was tired, and she laid her head back. So, okay, let you go sleep for a bit with her. Okay. And then about 15 to 20 minutes after that, I was like, okay, are you good? You're ready to go home? She wasn't responding or anything. What's your plan?
Jalen reported that Zion's pulse was faint. Then he described her heartbeat as non-existent. His young cousin had simply died on his couch, he said. Instead of contacting 911, he panicked. Not knowing how she died, he thought it would appear as though he had killed her.
She was getting very, very faint, and her breathing was like non-existent. So I freaked out. Okay, well, this is terrible. So it's very bad. I didn't know what to do. So I took her, I put her in some truck, and I put her in some truck. And I took her to my truck and put her inside of the trash can, and then I left.
Detectives queried how Jalen knew that Zion was dead. According to his story, the 17-year-old had inexplicably, very abruptly, stopped breathing.
As back on the couch, she's still lying back. You should probably just hide her, breathe. And as we start shaking her, she doesn't wake up. You check her pulse, she's out, and you see she's not breathing up like that. So at that point, what are you doing? Freaking out. Okay, so you're freaking out, and this whole time you're like, oh, dead weight. I mean, but she's definitely dead. Yeah. Was she dead? You think she's dead at that point, or is she still, is that any breathing? There wasn't anything. There was nothing at that point. Yeah. Okay. You know, just she was dead alive, right? Was she not breathing? She wasn't breathing. So I assumed that saying my heartbeat was like, I couldn't read her heartbeat, couldn't tell her heartbeat or anything. So I would say she was dead. Okay.
I want to have you show us. Because I don't want to mistake it. I want to obviously get out there and see if she's still there, and we can recover, and if not, we do the steps to locate where she's at. Okay? You're okay with that?
Jalen led detectives to the dumpsters in Highland Park, where he claimed to have left Zion's body weeks before. Jalen told detectives that Zion had been at his home for roughly 2 hours before she died. This would have placed her time of death at just past 1 a.m. Cell phone records showed her device drop off the network at 1:15 a.m., corresponding to the time that she stopped responding to messages from Bertez. Jalen told detectives that he had not deleted any data from his device since the night of Zion's death. They found, however, that he had conducted a full factory reset of his phone just 2 days later, effectively wiping everything held on his device. Nonetheless, the movements of his phone could be pieced together. This data placed Jalen at the dumpsters at Highland Park at 1:48 a.m. He claimed to have placed her in the dumpster to the right. There was no longer any sign of her there.
He said that my baby just died, and then that he threw her in a dumpster. Like she was trash.
When Jalen sat down for a follow-up interview the next day, January 20th, inconsistencies began to emerge in his story. He now claimed that the two had taken acid that night. It was her response to the psychedelics that must have caused her heart to stop. Of course, this explanation was about as likely as his previous assertion that the marijuana had caused her death. The detective attempted to leverage these new claims to compel a confession. Perhaps Jalen would use the drugs as an excuse for his actions, for whatever steps he took to kill his younger cousin.
Was trying to psychedelics, acid, and I think that's what you were saying. Did you have like a certain momentary that didn't want you to do it moment? She also Tuesday for herself. Now, let me ask you this, the problem with those drugs are, when you're on them, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, that's the reason people take them, right? Did you do something when you were, I mean, again, I'm trying to figure this out, you know, it would make complete sense. When you try out the acid, did you have, you know, I'm not saying it's okay, but I was really hungry. I just think I don't know if the effect for her was positive or something that actually does a lot to your brain. Yeah, it does a lot. I'm going to tell you right now, it makes sense to me now. It all makes sense to me. You understand that, right? Because I'm sitting here trying to figure out how this nice young guy Jay could have ever done it. But it makes sense to me now. It's not you, it's not Jay. You understand that, right? If you did something under the influence that I don't even know that because that's a big difference and I can understand it, that I can appreciate.
The detective failed to elicit a confession. Without this admission and without locating Zion, there was not enough evidence to proceed with an indictment for murder. Jalen was placed under arrest and held in custody for one count of lying to police.
He made the police actively deceiving him on the whereabouts of Zion Foster, the health and safety of Zion Foster, and his interaction with him.
In June of that year, Jalen spoke with detectives again. This time, only the audio was recorded. At that time, he changed his story once more. Jalen recanted his claim that the two had taken acid that night. That part was not true. Other smaller details of the story changed as well. He no longer described Zion as passed out on the couch. Now, she was on the floor. He said that he had felt pressured by police to offer more information, so he made up a more elaborate story to appease them.
So I left that out. On the LSD, but yeah, we're both turkey and LSD. And he must have hit her different, hit her wrong. Did you say it? Or did he just say he's telling me that? Is he telling me bullshit? They didn't say it, or did you know that? Okay, I'll go back. You just throw something out there.
Garbage collection trucks working in Highland Park were tracked to specified areas in local landfills. The task of sorting through mounds of trash from all over the Detroit area and compiled over several weeks was a daunting undertaking. An estimated 8-week project was launched. Dozens of volunteers, mostly wearing masks and hazmat suits, and assisted by heavy machinery, picked through layer after layer of the landfill systematically, looking for any sign of Zion.
We expect phase one to take approximately 2 weeks, but we're doing what's right for the right reasons, and we're going to do everything we possibly can to bring some degree of closure. It will never be complete closure, but some degree of closure and justice to this family.
Meanwhile, Jalen Brazier faced up to 4 years in prison for the lies he had told police. The Detroit Police Department, the DPD, assisted by the FBI, continued to seek a warrant for murder. Jalen pled his case to the judge at his sentencing.
One, I did turn myself in. Yes, I lied, but I was not in the right state of mind. There was no way for me to prepare for a situation like that. I was scared. I don't know exactly how she passed, what caused her to pass. I just know 1 minute she was cool, she was fine, she laid back for a minute. Next thing I know, she was dead. I don't know what caused it. I did not cause it or anything like that. I reacted stupidly off of fear and panic like I've never felt before in my life. Weird.
You think she died and then he disposed of the body? Just like that? That was your choice?
Did not know what to do. I sat for at least 10 minutes sitting there. Like, what do I do? Who do I call? My kids were upstairs. We just got into this place after struggling for like 2 years to get it, and everything's falling down.
I won't have any conversation in the store.
And I wish I could take it back. I would have called the ambulance, called her mom. Her mom's so sweet. Her mom is so sweet. I just know. I wish I could take it back. Nobody in the situation. At the very least, they'd be like, okay, this happened, confirm this. And everybody has some sort of peace right now. You know?
Jalen Brazier was sentenced to 23 months in prison. Jalen's phone calls home to girlfriend Katrina and other family members were monitored closely while he was in custody. Occasionally, he would use another inmate's calling code to make his phone calls in a failed attempt to keep his conversations private. He was also in possession of a prohibited cell phone, which he used to exchange thousands of messages with Katrina. Repeatedly in his calls, Jalen would ask if anything major happened. This seemed to be a poorly concealed attempt to ask whether the massive search of the landfill had located anything, or anyone.
The most logical and possible one, right? Is that there's nothing major to do, and due to that, there's a lot of effort to put together any type of anything, and that's basically the most logical thing that I came up with.
Jalen's concerns over the search for Zion were telling. If his story was truthful and she had died abruptly from an unknown and nonviolent cause, then there would be every reason for him to want her found. Finding Zion would exonerate him. The quicker, the better. Wishing her to be found should also be the sentiment of a loving cousin. Curiously, over and over again, he expressed his relief that no major developments had occurred in the search. As the final days of the landfill project drew near, he referred to it as a search for COVID. Jalen served just over 9 months before being granted early release. He had been placed in a special 90-day incarceration program. This boot camp is designed like a military program in which inmates convicted of certain crimes can better themselves while inside, and in turn, they are rewarded with early release. It had been nearly a year and Zion had not been found. An indictment for murder had not been sought, and now the prime suspect returned to his home and his family.
Why is this man free?
What? I can admit to this and still be let free.
Jalen Brazier's freedom was short-lived. On the 13th of June 2023, after a year-and-a-half investigation, the DPD were finally granted a warrant for arrest. The 24-year-old would face charges of second-degree murder, as well as tampering with evidence. Upon his arrest for Zion's murder, 2 additional cell phones were taken. Despite the factory reset that he performed on his device, investigators were able to retrieve some of the activity. His search history had been held in cloud storage. On January 7th, 3 days after dumping his cousin's body in a dumpster, Jalen performed a handful of Google searches. Are garbage trucks also compactors? What is the force of a garbage truck compactor? How do police get your phone history? And how do you know if police are watching you? In addition to these incriminating searches, investigators found that in the months before the incident, Jalen had performed a number of disturbingly suggestive searches for pornographic content containing the words cousin and step-cousin. Experts were able to retrieve the video results of these searches, some of which were reportedly very violent, as well as graphic in nature. As the case approached trial, a preliminary hearing offered more insight into the additional evidence that had emerged since Jalen's release. This hearing also may have offered Jalen's defense team a new theory. At the hearing, Vertez Gonzalez testified that he believed his girlfriend was taking regular medication for epilepsy. He told the court that Zion told him that she had seizures and that without her medication, they became more frequent and severe. In one instance, Vertez saw Zion become momentarily faint, slouching forward before regaining her composure after just a few seconds. This episode, he believed, could have been a seizure.
Have you ever seen her have a seizure?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
And while she was having a seizure, explain to me what happened.
I mean, just like a little pass out. That's it, like quick little seizure, like.
And she would pass out, was she foaming at the mouth?
Or no.
Okay, she was shaking uncontrollably?
No.
Okay, so she was passed out?
Yeah, just for a quick second, she was like, get back straight.
Sierra Milton, whose youngest child was in fact diagnosed with such a condition, testified that this was not the case. Zion had never suffered a seizure. Hundreds of pages of medical records covering years of treatment appear to support Sierra's assertion. Nonetheless, Jalen Brazier's version of events was now being presented in a new light. Perhaps Zion's condition led to her death suddenly in his living room. Maybe she had a seizure.
Now, there are only 2 people who can say exactly what happened inside of the house that night. One of them is Zion, and she is gone. The other is the defendant, and you will hear that nearly every time he spoke about what happened, his story changed. And although he got rid of Zion's body, you will see that he left behind a trail of digital evidence that is damning and will show you that the circumstances all lead to one and only one explanation for why Zion left his house in the trunk of his car that night, and that's because he murdered her.
She also had a history of seizures and taking seizure medication. Now, on this particular day, she came over to Jalen's house. They were smoking. Jalen told the police after some time that she had shallow breathing and a faint heartbeat. He checked her to see if she was alive, and she was dead. He didn't fear because he was doing drugs, still federally illegal, that he could be blamed for something, and he panicked.
Zion's phone disconnected from the network at 1:15 a.m. the same night that she disappeared. and was then lost with her. But the teenager's previous cell phone was safe at home. Sierra and Milton handed this device over to police. On it, they found months of correspondence between her and her favorite cousin. The messages he sent ranged from subtle and unsettling to deeply inappropriate. At times, the messages were sexually explicit. Over 4,000 distinct texts were retrieved from Zion's old device. In them, Jalen routinely invited her over to his home while his girlfriend was away. He offered to put her up in his basement if she ran away from home. He also advised her on how she might evade police if she ran away once more. Wayne County Assistant Prosecutor Ryan Elsey described the texts as pervasive, at times complimentary of her intelligence and looks, at other times probing in an immature way. For example, he suggested to her that other people thought that they were a couple. He said Katrina, the mother of his children, was jealous of her. Isn't that crazy? Did that make sense to her? He then bragged to Zion about how easily he could get with women. At one point, he called himself a god. Prosecutor Elsey concluded by telling the jury that the 23-year-old had been grooming his younger cousin for years, that he fantasized about her, and that on January 4th, he must have acted on his impulses. This was the twisted motive that led to her death. Jurors heard about how Jalen learned that Katrina was pregnant with their third child on the day that he brought Zion to his house. Messages between the couple showed how he had lied